Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are tackling, well, maybe the biggest philosophical puzzle out there, theodicy.
Hmm.
How can you have an all-powerful, perfectly good God, and also all the evil and suffering we see? People have wrestled with this forever, right? Usually trying to figure out God's side of it. Did he make evil? Allow it. But today, we're diving into sources presenting the Latter-day Saint perspective, which it does something really different. It shifts the whole focus away from God's choices onto our self-discovery.
Exactly. That shift is, well, it's everything in this framework. It kind of bypasses the whole classical problem by saying evil doesn't start with God's will. Instead, life, mortality, it's this ongoing process renewed every week where we figure out our own character. And the sacrament, that's the absolute core, the pulsing liturgical heart, as one source puts it, driving that whole process.
Okay, pulsing liturgical heart. I like that. Let's unpack it. So we're going to walk through about 6 key ideas that build this up, from where evil even comes from, through mortality's test, and landing on this idea of a self-confessed final judgment. Right, first step, the bedrock. Where does the possibility of evil even start in this view?
Well, the first big move is a pretty radical one, theologically speaking. LDS thought flat out denies creatio ex nihilo, creation from nothing. It teaches that our core intelligence, the light of truth, it wasn't created or made. It's always existed.
Always existed. So we're co-eternal with God in some fundamental sense.
That's the idea. And it totally reframes the problem of evil. Because if intelligence is eternal, then the potential for choosing evil is just as eternal as the potential for choosing good. So evil isn't some, substance God cooked up. It's more like a direction an eternal intelligence can choose once it's organized and has agency. This cuts the cord, tracing evil back to God's design.
Okay, that makes sense. And this also changes how we think about God's own goodness, right? It's not just assumed. The sources mention Abraham 3, suggesting God himself proved his character over, previous tests or probations.
Exactly right. His goodness is described as a historical achievement. He earned his position, his sovereignty, through what the sources call observable fidelity across vast stretches of time. He proved he was the most trustworthy, the more intelligent than they all, capable of organizing things righteously.
Wow. God earning his goodness. That's a powerful concept.
Mm.
Okay, so if God's character is proven and he's trustworthy, why the need for us to go through such a rigorous test? This brings us to opposition, doesn't it?
Yeah, but first, let's be clear about the stakes. Exaltation, in this view, it's not just about harps and clouds. The sources are blunt. It means inheriting all that the Father hath, which includes, as one source put it pretty dramatically, the power to speak galaxies into existence.
Whoa, okay, that's immense power.
Immense, and that kind of power absolutely has to be gated. It can only be entrusted to a character that's been thoroughly tested and proven reliable, proven incapable of abusing it, and that's why opposition is indispensable. Lehi's teaching in 2 Nephi 2 lays out this pretty rigorous metaphysics.
Right.
Without resistance, without experiencing things like wickedness or misery or just plain bad, choice isn't really choice.
Right. If you never face temptation, you just sort of default to being good. You haven't actively chosen it over anything else. The choice didn't reveal your inner leaning.
Precisely. And this is where the genius of the veil comes in, as the sources describe it. The fact that we forget our premortal life isn't a flaw or some cruel cosmic joke. Think about it. If you remembered everything, the stakes, God's presence, your promises, your choices here would be totally performative. You'd just be playing a part. Suspending that memory ensures that every choice reflects your raw underlying desire.
Okay, so the test isn't really for God's benefit. He knows already. It's for us. It's like a blind trial we run on ourselves to achieve genuine self-knowledge. We're here to figure out who we really are deep down.
That's it, exactly. And it's not a one-size-fits-all test either. The sources argue the curriculum is tailored.
Yeah, let's get into that, the graduated curriculum. This seems to address the really hard part of theodicy, like why suffering seems so unevenly distributed. The sources point to Abraham 3 again, suggesting spirits had different capacities or valiance even before this life.
That God identified certain noble and great ones based on these pre-existing differences in their aptitude for righteousness, foreordaining them for specific roles. And this leads to maybe the most challenging idea in this whole model. The principle that greater premortal light and capacity often means facing greater mortal opposition. So someone experiencing really severe trials isn't necessarily being punished. They might actually be being trusted with a curriculum that matches their eternal potential. The ultimate example given is Christ himself, more intelligent than they all, who suffered infinitely.
Okay, hold on. I can see how that might work theologically, but framing intense suffering as a sign of trust. That sounds, well, potentially like a way to rationalize immense pain. How do the sources handle the apparent unfairness, the sheer disproportionality we see sometimes?
That's a crucial question, and the sources do address it. They talk about that kind of disproportionate suffering, the child killed in a war, the person battling addiction because of biology, as unavoidable features of agency, not flaws in the design. Perfect, neat proportionality is basically impossible when you have billions of free agents interacting, creating all this noise, this unpredictable turbulence.
The chaos of freedom, essentially.
Pretty much. The goal isn't perfect fairness moment to moment. It's still about revealing character despite the noise. But you're right, that noise means there absolutely has to be a safety net, a way to ensure ultimate justice. And that brings us to the atonement.
Right, the infinite reservoir of mercy. Let's really focus on the scale here. D&C 19 talks about Christ bleeding from every pore.
Mm.
The sources insist this wasn't just, a lot of suffering. It was infinite suffering. A surplus that way exceeds the sum total of all sin and pain.
And that infinite scale is absolutely critical. It acts as the ultimate guarantee of cosmic equity. This massive surplus allows God to essentially pay the difference for those crushed by circumstances beyond their control. Think of the victim of systemic injustice or someone overwhelmed by inherited trauma. The atonement covers that gap, ensuring that even with all the noise of agency, no one is ultimately tested beyond what justice, plus this infinite mercy, can balance out and redeem.
Okay, so it's like the ultimate theological backstop. It ensures the whole system remains just despite the messiness of free will. That changes things when you think about fairness. But okay, if the mercy reservoir is infinite, why bother? Why not just kick back and coast, knowing it's all covered?
Because grace in this model isn't about enabling indifference, it amplifies effort. The sources are really emphatic about this. Trying to just coast is called presumption, and presumption itself is seen as a major character flaw. It reveals a heart that isn't actually interested in becoming righteous, just in getting the benefits. Alma 34 gives a stark warning against exactly that attitude.
Got it. So effort still matters immensely, which leads us right to the practical weekly engine of this whole thing, the sacrament. If life is this weekly process of revelation and renewal, the sacrament is the mirror you look into each week.
Precisely. It's described as a weekly re-ratification of your baptismal covenants. When you partake of the bread and water, you're consciously recommitting to remember Christ, keep commandments, bear burdens. You're forced into this moment of introspection. Am I still aligned with the person I covenanted to be? Is this still what I want?
And Paul's instruction to let a man examine himself essentially turns that moment, that sacrament table, into a kind of miniature judgment bar every single Sunday. It's like a rolling self-audit.
Exactly. And the bread and water themselves are seen as these small, granular installments of that infinite atonement payment. They bridge the gap between what you deserved that week because of your shortcomings and the grace you received. This is so important because it means probation isn't one giant pass-fail final exam at the end. There's room for constant, immediate course correction.
I really like that source phrase you mentioned earlier, muscle memory for exaltation. It totally reframes the sacrament. It's not just checking a box, it's actively formative. It's training your desires, your spiritual reflexes to align with what you'll eventually profess.
Yes, that formative aspect makes it the ultimate anti-presumption mechanism because it demands present alignment, current desire. It just destroys that, I'll repent properly later excuse. It actively shapes the will week by week towards the divine.
Okay, so the sacrament is the weekly rehearsal, the character workout. How does this connect to the grand finale, the final judgment? How does this weekly practice prepare you for that?
It's the logical culmination. Remember, God knows the end from the beginning. The sources stress this. So the whole point of mortality wasn't for him to gather data he didn't have. The purpose, as 2 Nephi puts it, was self-acquaintance, that they might have joy and be agents unto themselves. It's about us coming to know ourselves.
So that moment in Revelation, when the books are opened, showing every thought and deed. It's not supposed to be a shocking reveal for the soul being judged. It's more like recognition.
Exactly. The soul sees itself laid bare and simply recognizes, yes, that is who I chose to become. There's no coercion needed. And this brings us right back to the core thesis. The final judgment is described as this moment of uncoerced recognition. Because the soul has spent a lifetime practicing this self-assessment, this confession in the mirror of the sacrament each week, they essentially step forward and self-report. They say, in effect, this is the degree of glory I chose through my desires and actions, and it feels right. It is just. The judgment is fundamentally self-confessed.
Wow. Okay, so let's recap. This Latter-day Saint Theodicy isn't about a distant God inflicting trials. It's a weekly liturgy of self-revelation. Mortality is a weekly laboratory of character. Evil's potential is eternal, not God-made. Opposition is vital for real choice. The atonement is this infinite safety net applied personally each week through the sacrament, which acts as both mirror and medicine.
And that detailed picture brings us back one last time to that huge philosophical question the sources have to tackle. If God already knows the outcome, how is our agency truly real?
Right. If my final self-assessment is already known, what was the point of the whole difficult journey?
The resolution offered is pretty straightforward. Foreknowledge isn't the same as causation. God knowing what you will ultimately desire and choose doesn't force you to choose it. He anticipates the desire, you enact it. And the sacrament is precisely the mechanism that preserves that agency week after week. It places the choice, the ratification of your current desire and trajectory squarely back in your hands every Sunday.
That's quite a framework. It reframes the universe. Not a courtroom trying to catch you messing up, but maybe more like a graduation ceremony, designed, ultimately, to help you recognize and affirm the character you chose to build. Which leaves us with a final thought. If the sacrament is muscle memory for exaltation, what does that imply about the small, seemingly insignificant choices you make every single day? Something to definitely chew on.